Eleanor Marsh signed her name on that paper with a hand that didn't tremble, because she had already cried every tear she owned the night before, alone in the dark, where no one could see a woman break. She didn't look up at the man she was promised to. She didn't look at her father. But across the room, through the open door of the sheriff's office, a stranger she had never spoken to stood with his hat in his hands and watched her like he was the only person in that room who understood what was being taken from her. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word. And drop a comment below. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1879 came to Ridgeline, Colorado like a punishment. The sun pressed down on the town from the moment it rose, baking the dirt roads into cracked clay, pulling the moisture out of every living thing that stood beneath it. By mid-morning, the shade under the general store's awning was the only mercy the town offered. By afternoon, even that was gone. Eleanor Marsh had lived in Ridgeline her entire 27 years. She knew every face on every porch, every name above every shop door, every family secret that the town pretended didn't exist. She knew which men drank too much on Saturdays. She knew which wives smiled too carefully on Sundays. She knew the way Ridgeline worked, who had power, who pretended to have it, and who got crushed when those two things collided. She had spent her whole life being careful not to get crushed. That summer, she ran out of room to be careful. Her father, William Marsh, called her into his study on the first Tuesday of June. He didn't ask her to sit down. That was the first sign. William Marsh only asked people to sit when the conversation was going to take time. When he wanted something settled quickly, he stood behind his desk with his hands flat on the surface, and he delivered the information. The way a man hammers a nail. One sharp strike, no hesitation. "I've made arrangements," he said. Eleanor stood in the doorway. What kind of arrangements? The kind that solve problems. He didn't look up from the papers on his desk. "Harlan Driscoll has agreed to take the southern parcel off my hands. He's also agreed to absorb the debt on the northern fields." Eleanor's chest went still. She understood numbers. She had been managing her father's accounts since she was 16 after her mother passed, and her father discovered that ledgers gave him headaches, but figures came easily to his eldest daughter. She knew exactly what those two parcels represented. Together they were nearly 2/3 of the Marsh farm. "You're selling the land," she said. "I'm settling the debt." He finally looked up. There's a condition. She already knew. Something in her stomach had known from the moment he didn't ask her to sit down. "Harlan wants a wife," William said. "He's been looking for a settled woman. Someone who knows how to run a household, manage accounts, keep things orderly." He held her gaze without flinching. "I told him you fit that description." The room didn't spin. Eleanor had always hated that expression, the world spinning, when a woman received bad news. The world didn't spin. It just kept standing exactly where it was, unchanged, while everything inside you rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. "You told him," she said carefully, "that I would marry him. I told him you were sensible enough to understand the situation. And if I don't understand it the way you'd like..." William set down his pen. His voice didn't rise. It never did. That was the thing about her father. He never needed to shout, because he had never once in his life believed that anyone would seriously refuse him. "The bank takes the whole property in September," he said. "Every acre, the house included. Your sisters have nowhere to go. Your brother's too young to work. If Harlan Driscoll absorbs that debt and buys those parcels, this family keeps the house and enough land to survive the winter." He paused. "If he doesn't, we lose everything." "So you're trading me for the farm?" "I'm asking you to be practical." Eleanor looked at her father for a long moment. She thought about every account book she had balanced for him, every harvest estimate she had calculated, every letter to creditors she had drafted in his name, because his writing was too slow and his arithmetic was too proud. She thought about all the years she had been practical. "When?" she asked. 2 weeks. She nodded once, turned, and walked out of the study. She didn't slam the door. She closed it gently, the way she closed everything, carefully, quietly, without making a scene. She walked to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and stared at her own hands for a long time. Then she got up and started making supper because her sisters were hungry, and the cows still needed feeding, and the world had not stopped requiring things of her just because her future had been sold. Harlan Driscoll was 53 years old. He owned the largest cattle operation in the county, a two-story house on the edge of town that everyone called the Driscoll Place, and a reputation that divided Ridgeline cleanly down the middle. Half the town thought he was a successful man who had built something from nothing. The other half kept their daughters away from him and didn't explain why. Eleanor had always been in the second half. She just hadn't had a reason to say it out loud until now. She met him formally for the first time 3 days after her father's announcement in the parlor of the Marsh house, with her father sitting in the corner, like a satisfied accountant watching a deal close. Harlan Driscoll had a wide face, a slow smile, and the particular kind of confidence that came from never having been told no by anyone who couldn't afford to say it. He looked at Eleanor the way a man looks at a horse before he buys it, assessing, satisfied with what he saw, not particularly interested in what the horse preferred. "You're quieter than I expected," he said. "I'm thinking," Eleanor replied. "About what? Whether there's coffee." She turned to her father. "Is there coffee?" Her father's expression went tight. Harlan Driscoll laughed a short, comfortable sound, the laugh of a man who found female stubbornness charming in small doses because he fully expected it to disappear after the wedding. "I like a woman with a little spirit," he said. "Easier to break in than a dull one." Eleanor smiled at him pleasantly and thought, "Over my dead body." But she didn't say it, because her sisters needed the house, and her brother was 14, and the bank didn't negotiate. Chale. The stranger arrived in Ridgeline on a Thursday. Eleanor saw him first from the window of the general store, where she was picking up flour and trying not to think about the dress fitting scheduled for the following morning. He came in from the north road, which meant he'd come down from the mountains. That alone was unusual. Most travelers came through the valley. People who came from the north had been up high working timber-running cattle through the summer passes, or living the kind of solitary life that didn't require a town. He was tall, not the showy kind of tall that men in town sometimes cultivated with boot heels and straight posture. The kind of tall that was just the way he was built without any effort toward it. He wore a dark hat with a deep crease in the crown, a canvas jacket despite the heat, and boots that had seen serious country. He rode a bay horse with the easy seat of a man who had spent more time on horseback than off it. He didn't look at the storefronts or the people on the boardwalk the way strangers usually did, with that mix of curiosity and navigation, trying to read a new town quickly. He looked at the street itself, the condition of it, the way the buildings sat, the distance between things, like a man who was evaluating something. Not admiring it, evaluating it. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and went inside. Eleanor watched until he disappeared through the door, then turned back to the store counter and her flour and told herself it was none of her business. His name, as it turned out, was Cole Rigdon. She learned that from Martha Ennis, who learned it from the sheriff's deputy, who had apparently had a 20-minute conversation with the man about the mountain roads north of Ridgeline. "He's looking at the Hatcher property," Martha said, leaning over the fence between their yards with the particular energy of a woman who had found something interesting in an otherwise dull week. "The old Hatcher ranch up on the ridge. Been empty for 2 years. I didn't know it was for sale," Eleanor said. "Everything's for sale if you ask the right person." Martha lowered her voice, though there was no one within hearing distance. "The deputy said he's been ranching up in the North Ranges for years. Alone. No family far as anyone knows. Just shows up out of nowhere wanting to buy a piece of ridge property." She tilted her head. "Odd, don't you think?" "Lots of men ranch alone," Eleanor said. "Not many of them look like that." Eleanor picked up her basket. "I have accounts to settle." "Eleanor Marsh, you are the least curious woman I have ever met." "I'm plenty curious," Eleanor said, walking toward her gate. "I just have better things to do with it." That wasn't entirely true. She was curious. She simply couldn't afford to be distracted right now, not with the dress fitting tomorrow and the wedding date already set for the last Saturday of June, and every practical corner of her brain engaged in trying to figure out if there was any possible way out of this that didn't end with her family losing everything. There wasn't. She had checked the numbers 6 times. She ran into him, Cole Rigdon, the following morning outside the land office. She was coming out. He was going in. They nearly collided in the doorway, and she stepped back at the same moment he did. And for a moment, they were both just standing there in the early morning heat, working out which direction to go. "My apologies, ma'am," he said. He moved to the left. She moved right. They were clear. She almost kept walking. Something made her stop. Maybe it was the way he said it. Not the reflexive, half-attention apology that men gave when they nearly bumped into women they weren't particularly registering. He said it like he meant it, like the collision was a genuine inconvenience he'd caused her, and he was genuinely sorry for it. "No harm done," she said. He nodded, touched the brim of his hat, and reached for the door. "You're looking at the Hatcher property," she said. She didn't know why she said it. The words were just there, already spoken, before she had a chance to decide whether to say them. He paused with his hand on the doorframe and looked back at her. His eyes were a dark, steady gray, the kind of color that looked like it was assessing everything and giving away nothing. "News travels fast in a small town," he said. It wasn't unfriendly, it was just a fact. "It does," she agreed. "I'm not asking to pry. The Hatcher land is good ground, but the upper pasture floods in August. Most people don't know that until they've already bought it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know the property?" "My father's land bordered it on the east side for 15 years. I used to help him check the fence lines." She paused. "The ridge itself is solid. The drainage is the problem. If you're planning summer grazing, you'd want to know." He studied her for a second with that level measuring look. Not suspicious, not dismissive, just taking the information in, weighing it the way a careful man weighs unexpected things. "Thank you," he said finally. "I appreciate that." "It's just information," she said. "Good luck with the land." She walked away. She didn't look back. She had a dress fitting in an hour and a wedding in 3 weeks, and Cole Rigdon's grazing situation was genuinely not her concern. But she thought about those gray eyes for the rest of the morning, and that annoyed her, and she told herself it was just because she hadn't slept well. The dress fitting was a quiet misery. The seamstress, a kind woman named Dora Phelps, kept her opinions to herself, which Eleanor appreciated. Other women in Ridgeline had not been so restrained. The past week had involved 2 separate conversations in which women she barely knew had congratulated her on landing Harlan Driscoll, as if this were an achievement she had competed for. "It's a nice fabric," Dora said, carefully smoothing the seam at Eleanor's shoulder. "It's fine," Eleanor said. The lace at the collar was Harlan's suggestion. "I know." Dora glanced up at her in the mirror. Her voice was very gentle. "Eleanor, are you all right?" Eleanor looked at herself in the glass. The dress was a pale gray with ivory lace at the throat. She looked appropriate. She looked like a woman who was making a sensible arrangement. She looked like exactly what she was, which was a woman who had run out of options. "I'm fine, Dora," she said. "Just tired." Dora nodded and went back to the hem, and neither of them said anything else. She was walking home from the seamstress when she heard the raised voices from the direction of the feed store. She recognized one of the voices immediately. It was Caleb Marsh, her younger brother, 14 years old, and in possession of a temper that had not yet learned to calculate odds before deploying itself. She turned the corner and found Caleb squared off against 2 older boys outside the feed store. The older boys were 16, maybe 17 sons of men who worked for Harlan Driscoll as it happened, and aware of the social math that this currently represented. "Say it again," Caleb was saying. His hands were in fists at his sides. "Your sister's getting sold to pay your daddy's debts," the taller boy said. He was grinning. "That's what everyone's saying." "You take that back. Why is it not true?" Eleanor was already moving toward them. "Caleb!" Caleb's head turned. The distraction was all the taller boy needed. He shoved Caleb hard, and Caleb went back against the wall of the feed store, and the grinning boy moved forward with the satisfied look of someone about to make this significantly worse. He didn't get the chance. A hand came down on his shoulder. One hand very firm, not violent, just absolutely immovable. And Cole Rigdon stepped between the two boys with the unhurried ease of a man who had placed himself between worse things than this and found it unremarkable. "I think that's enough," Cole said. His voice was quiet. That was the thing that registered, not loud, not aggressive, just completely certain. The grinning boy looked up at him. The grin flickered. Cole didn't move, didn't tighten the grip, just looked at the boy with that steady gray gaze and waited. "We were just talking," the boy said. "You were done talking," Cole said. "Move along." The two older boys exchanged a look. Then they moved. Not quickly because they had pride to consider, but they moved and the matter was finished. Cole let go of the boy's shoulder and turned to Caleb. "You all right, son?" Caleb was flushed and furious and embarrassed, which was an extremely uncomfortable combination to be when you were 14. "I didn't need help," he said. "No." Cole agreed in a tone that somehow managed to be neither condescending nor false. "But now you don't have to prove it." Eleanor reached them. Caleb looked at her with the particular misery of a younger sibling who has been rescued in front of a witness. "Thank you," Eleanor said to Cole. He turned to her, touched the brim of his hat. That same careful gesture. "No trouble," he said. "You seem to be encountering a great deal of our family today for someone who just arrived in town." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. "Small town," he said. "So you said." He looked at her for a moment, that assessing look again, but different from the land office. Quieter, like he was trying to work something out. "I took your advice," he said. "About the upper pasture. Asked the land agent to include a drainage survey in the deed review." "Good," she said. "It was good information." He paused. "You know land." "My father's land," she said. Past tense. Something shifted in his expression. Barely. But she noticed. "Come on, Caleb," she said, and put her hand on her brother's shoulder and turned him toward home. She did not look back this time either, but she heard his horse moving away from the feed store, heading north toward the ridge road, and she stood there in the sun with her hand on her brother's shoulder, and felt for one strange clear moment, something that she hadn't felt in 3 weeks. Like there was someone else in the world who noticed things. 2 days before the wedding, Eleanor's youngest sister came to find her at the kitchen table at midnight. Anna was 17, small and sharp-eyed, and far less inclined than Eleanor to keep her thoughts to herself. She stood in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown and looked at Eleanor with an expression that contained equal parts love and fury. "You don't have to do this," Anna said. "Go to sleep, Anna." "Eleanor, the bank takes everything in September." Eleanor didn't look up from the ledger she wasn't actually reading. "We lose the house. Papa's debt follows us. There's no work in town that pays enough to keep 6 people, and you know it. There has to be another way. I have been looking for another way for 3 weeks." Eleanor set down her pen. "I have checked every number 3 times. I have thought about every option. The options are marry Harlan Driscoll or lose the house." Anna sat down across from her. "What if we just left, all of us started somewhere else?" "With what?" Eleanor asked. "We have $30 in the household account. We have a wagon that needs a new axle. We have Papa who cannot do heavy work anymore, and Thomas who is 14. I cannot load 6 people into a broken wagon with $30 and take them to somewhere else." She held her sister's gaze. "I know you want a different answer. I don't have one." Anna was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very low, "He's not a good man, Eleanor." Eleanor looked at her carefully. "What do you know?" "I know what people say. People say a lot of things." I know what specific people say." Anna's voice had dropped further. "Mrs. Gallagher's niece. She was engaged to him 4 years ago. She broke it off and wouldn't say why, but she cried for a month and her mother moved them both to Denver the following spring and hasn't come back." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's not evidence," Eleanor said. Her voice was steady. Her hands under the table were not. "I know," Anna said. "I just wanted you to know. I know." Eleanor breathed in slowly. She thought about Harlan Driscoll's voice, easier to break in than a dull one. She thought about the way he had looked at her in the parlor. Satisfied. Already certain she was his. "I'll be careful," she said. "Eleanor, I know what I'm walking into." She reached across the table and covered her sister's hand with hers. "And I know why I'm walking into it. That's enough." Anna didn't answer. Her jaw was tight and her eyes were bright, and she looked in that moment exactly like their mother had looked when she was angry about something she knew she couldn't fix. Eleanor squeezed her hand and let go. "Get some sleep," she said. "There's a lot to do tomorrow." She saw Cole Rigdon one more time before the wedding. It was the morning before the Friday, the last ordinary day she was going to have for a very long time, maybe forever. She had gone to the general store for thread because the hem on her second-best dress had come loose, and she needed something to occupy her hands. He was at the counter when she came in talking to the store owner about lumber. Something about fence posts and the quantity needed for the upper ridge line. Practical, specific, the conversation of a man who was already mentally placing himself on that land and figuring out what it needed. He noticed her when she came in. Nodded once. She nodded back. She found her thread. She waited. He finished his conversation, gathered his receipt, and turned toward the door. He stopped when he reached her. "Miss Marsh," he said. She looked up. "Mr. Rigdon." He held his hat in both hands, now turning it slightly, a small movement, almost unconscious. "I heard about the wedding tomorrow." She didn't ask how. Small town. She already knew how. "Then you know as much as anyone," she said. He looked at her for a moment. That long, level reading look that she was beginning to understand was just the way he engaged with things that mattered to him. Not staring, not intrusive, just fully present. "Is it what you want?" he asked. The question hit her like cold water. Not because it was inappropriate somehow from him, it wasn't. It was because no one had asked her that. Not once. Not her father, not the seamstress, not the women who congratulated her. Not even Anna, who had asked if she had to do it, which was a different question entirely. Nobody had asked if it was what she wanted. She looked at the thread in her hand. Blue. She had grabbed blue without thinking, and she needed white. "It's what needs to happen," she said. He was quiet. Then, "That's not the same thing." "No," she said. "It's not." She put the blue thread back, found the white, set it on the counter. She didn't look at him when she said, "Good luck with your fence lines, Mr. Rigdon." "Thank you, ma'am," he said, quietly, with the weight of a man who understood exactly what he was responding to and what he wasn't able to say. She heard him walk out. She heard the bell above the door. She stood at the counter with her white thread and her $30 household account and her 2 weeks away September deadline. And she pressed her hand flat against the wood and breathed very carefully until her eyes stopped burning. Then she paid for her thread and walked home to prepare for her wedding day. The mountains sat on the northern edge of the sky, high and still and unchanging the way they had always been. And somewhere up on that ridge, she knew a man she had spoken to 3 times was measuring fence lines and thinking about drainage and living the kind of life where his choices were still his own. She did not let herself want that, but she noticed it. The way she noticed everything she was trying not to feel. And in the marrow of something she hadn't named yet, she held it there, quiet, careful, surviving the way she held everything that mattered most. The morning of the wedding came without mercy. Eleanor was dressed and standing in the front room of the Marsh house before anyone else in the family had finished breakfast because she had not slept, and there was no point pretending she had. The white thread she had bought the day before was stitched neatly along the hem of her second-best dress. Her good dress, The pale gray with Harlan Driscoll's ivory lace at the throat was hanging on the back of the bedroom door, waiting. She stood at the front window and watched the road. She didn't know what she was watching for. Nothing was going to come down that road and change what today was. Her father appeared in the doorway behind her. He was dressed in his Sunday coat, his hair combed with the careful precision of a man who understood that appearances were all he had left to offer the occasion. "The wagon's ready," he said. "I know," she said. "Eleanor." He paused. "This is the right thing." She turned from the window and looked at him. He was 61 years old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and she had loved him her whole life with the particular complicated love that daughters have for fathers who mean well and cause damage anyway. "I know, Papa," she said. "Let's go." She walked past him to get her shawl, and she did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that would have helped. The church was half full by the time they arrived. Not because Eleanor Marsh was beloved by the whole town, she was respected, which is a different thing and cooler, but because Harlan Driscoll had influence and men with influence drew attendance the way water draws livestock. People came to be seen in the right place. She walked up the steps of the church with her father's arm under her hand and her chin at the correct angle, and she nodded to people she recognized, and she did not let anything show on her face, because she had decided somewhere between midnight and dawn that if this was happening, she was going to do it with her spine straight and her eyes clear. She was not going to give this town the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. Harlan was waiting at the front of the church. He turned when she came through the door, and his expression was the expression of a man receiving a delivery. He'd ordered "Please Proprietary," already thinking past the transaction to the ownership. She kept walking. Steady steps, her father's arm, the correct angle of her chin. She was 10 feet from the altar when the church door opened behind her. The sound of it, the creak of the hinge, the rectangle of summer light spilling in, made several people turn their heads. Eleanor didn't turn. She kept her eyes forward. She heard the murmur first. The small, confused ripple of sound that moved through the pews when something unexpected entered a space. Then she heard Harlan Driscoll's voice, low and flat, and suddenly stripped of all its easy confidence. "What is he doing here?" And then she did turn. Cole Rigdon stood just inside the church door. He was not dressed for a wedding. He was still in his canvas jacket and his working clothes hat in both hands, and he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had come directly from somewhere else and hadn't stopped to change, because stopping to change would have taken time he didn't have. He wasn't looking at Harlan. He was looking at Eleanor. The church had gone very quiet. "Miss Marsh," he said. His voice carried in the silence without effort, the way voices do when a room has stopped breathing. "I need you to hear something before this goes any further." Harlan stepped forward from the altar. "You have no business here, Rigdon. I'm not talking to you." Cole didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Eleanor, steady and direct, and the lack of drama in his face was somehow more arresting than any dramatic entrance could have been. "I have information about the debt on your family's land. Information you need to hear." Eleanor's father made a sound. The pastor made a sound. Several people in the pews shifted and murmured and leaned toward one another. Harlan's voice came out harder. "Whatever you think you have to say." "The Driscoll lien on the Marsh Northern Fields," Cole said, still not looking at him, still looking at Eleanor. "The one that's forcing this wedding. It's fraudulent, Miss Marsh. Harlan Driscoll manufactured the debt." The silence in the church went from quiet to absolute. Eleanor looked at Cole Rigdon's face. She looked for the signs of a man who was lying or guessing or trying to cause chaos for reasons of his own. She had become good at reading faces in the years she had spent managing her father's accounts and navigating other people's motivations. She didn't find any of those signs. "What do you mean manufactured?" she said. Her voice was completely level. "Your father borrowed money from the Territorial Bank 4 years ago," Cole said. "Standard loan, stock purchase. He made every payment. The debt was settled 18 months ago. I have the ledger records." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded set of papers. Driscoll purchased those debt records and altered them. Then he brought them to your father as proof of outstanding obligation. The murmur in the church was no longer small. Harlan Driscoll's voice, when it came, had changed register entirely. Lower. Controlled in the way that things are controlled when the person controlling them is very close to losing it. "That's a serious accusation, Rigdon. You'd better be able to back it." "I can back it," Cole said. He was still looking at Eleanor. "I spent the last 2 weeks going through the Territorial Bank's records. I have 3 affidavits from bank employees. I have the original loan ledger with your father's payment marks. And I have a letter from the Territorial Land Assessor confirming the Marsh property has been debt-free since March of last year." Eleanor's father from somewhere behind her made a sound like a man who has just been told something that rearranges the furniture of his entire understanding of the last 6 months. "William," he said, Harlan speaking now to her father, his voice suddenly too smooth again, the way an oil slick smooths over water. "Don't listen to this man. He arrived in town 3 weeks ago. He's a stranger trying to interfere in a private arrangement." "Private arrangement." Anna's voice came from the second pew, sharp and young and absolutely certain. "You mean the one where you invented a debt to force my sister into marrying you?" "Anna," her father started. "Is it true?" Eleanor asked. She had turned fully to face Harlan now. "Is the debt real?" Harlan's jaw moved. Something shifted behind his eyes, a rapid recalculation, the expression of a man who had built a structure and was watching someone pull the supporting beam out. "The arrangements your father and I made," he began. "Yes or no?" Eleanor said. "Is the debt on my family's land real?" The church waited. Harlan Driscoll did not answer, and in the silence of that non-answer, Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Not relief, not yet, because there was too much to untangle for relief, but something harder and cleaner. Like a locked door, finally turning on its hinge. She turned back to the front of the church. Not to the altar, to Cole. "Show me the papers," she said. They sat in the pastor's side office. Eleanor, Cole, her father, and the pastor himself, who had the quietly stunned expression of a man who had not anticipated his Saturday morning taking this particular shape. Harlan Driscoll had not sat down. He stood near the door with his arms crossed, and he had the look of a man working very hard to project the kind of calm confidence that announces, "This is a misunderstanding, and I will be the one who resolves it." Cole laid the papers on the pastor's desk one at a time. He didn't narrate them dramatically. He just placed them in sequence and let them speak, which was Eleanor was beginning to understand very much how he did most things. Her father leaned over the desk and looked at his own signature on a payment receipt dated 17 months ago. His face was the face of a man who has just discovered that someone reached into his life with both hands and rearranged it while he wasn't paying attention. "William," Harlan said from the door. "Those records could have been fabricated by anyone." "By anyone," Eleanor said without looking up from the ledger page. "Like the records you brought to my father 6 months ago. Which were also fabricated. By you." The room went quiet again. Cole watched Eleanor. Not the papers. Her. He was watching her the way you watch someone who is doing something that requires steadiness, not supervising, not directing. Just present. Just there. Her father straightened up slowly. He turned to look at Harlan Driscoll, and something in William Marsh's face had changed into something Eleanor had rarely seen on him. It was the face of a man who had believed himself to be making a hard but honest decision, and had just discovered that the ground he thought he was standing on didn't exist. "Harlan," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Did you fabricate those debt records?" It wasn't a question. Not really. The inflection was wrong for a question. It was a man stating something out loud that he already knew the answer to. Harlan's expression underwent several rapid changes. Then he landed on the version he had clearly decided would serve him best: injured dignity. "I came to you with legitimate concern about the state of your finances," he said. "I offered a solution that would keep your family secure. You lied to him." Eleanor set down the paper she was holding. She looked at Harlan Driscoll, with the specific clarity that comes when you have been afraid of something for 3 weeks, and you suddenly discover the thing you were afraid of was constructed specifically to make you afraid. It doesn't make you feel better. It makes you feel something colder. You manufactured a crisis to make my father desperate, and then you offered to solve the crisis in exchange for me. That is what you did, Miss Marsh. Don't. Her voice was quiet and absolutely final. Don't say another word to me. She stood up from her chair. She was still in her second-best dress. She had not changed into the gray wedding dress that morning, because something in her had balked at the last moment, and she had put on the second-best dress instead. And now she was fiercely grateful for that small act of unconscious resistance. "Pastor," she said, "I'd like you to witness that this wedding is not taking place." The pastor nodded. He looked profoundly relieved. "You won't do this," Harlan said. His voice had shifted again, quieter now, and something else under it, something that confirmed everything Anna had told her at midnight in the kitchen. "Eleanor, be practical. What do you think happens to your family?" "Nothing happens to my family," Eleanor said. "Because there is no debt, because you invented it." She picked up the papers from the pastor's desk and held them against her chest. "And now every person in that church knows you invented it, and the pastor is a witness, and I have documentation that the Territorial Bank will be very interested in reviewing." Harlan stared at her. Cole, still standing beside the desk, said nothing. He was watching Harlan, the way you watch weather patient, accurate ready. "You will regret this," Harlan said. "Probably not," Eleanor said. And then she walked past him and out the side door of the pastor's office into the summer heat, and she stood for a moment with her face turned up to the sky, breathing. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her skirt and breathed until they stopped. The church took 20 minutes to clear. Her father came out first. He found her sitting on the church steps, the papers on her lap, the shawl she hadn't needed abandoned beside her. He sat down next to her without saying anything for a long time, which was, she recognized, the most honest thing he had done in months. "I believed him," William finally said. "I know. I should have. I should have looked at the original records myself. I should have gone to the bank." "You were scared," Eleanor said. She wasn't angry. She was tired. There was a difference. "You were scared and someone handed you a solution and you took it. People do that." "Eleanor, what I asked of you is done," she said. "It's over." She put her hand on his arm. "It's over, Papa." He put his hand over hers and didn't speak again. Anna came out and sat on her other side and leaned her head against Eleanor's shoulder, and for a few minutes, all three of them just sat there in the morning sun while the town processed what had happened and sorted itself into the people who were going to have opinions about it and the people who were going to keep their heads down. Cole came out of the side door. He paused when he saw them on the steps, started to redirect, giving them the space of it, heading toward where his horse was tied. "Mr. Rigdon," Eleanor said. He stopped. "Will you sit for a minute?" He looked at her. Then he crossed to the steps and he sat down on the bottom step, one level below her, hat in his hands, and waited. "How did you find the records?" she asked. "I went looking," he said. "That's not an answer." He was quiet for a moment, turning the hat brim through his hands. "When I was at the land office looking at the Hatcher property, I ran into the records clerk, man named Briggs. He mentioned while we were talking about the ridge parcels that the marsh land had been in some kind of dispute. Said it didn't make sense to him because he'd processed the payment records himself 18 months ago. He paused. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right, so I asked him to pull the original ledgers. Eleanor looked at him. "You spent 2 weeks in the bank's records office because something a clerk said didn't sit right." "I had the time," he said. "That's still not an answer." He looked up at her then, directly, the gray eyes clear and careful and entirely without performance. "No," he agreed. "It's not." Anna, to Eleanor's left, had gone very still in the way that 17-year-olds go still when they are paying extremely close attention and trying to look like they are not. Eleanor's father cleared his throat and stood up. "I need to speak to the pastor about some things," he said, which was transparent but kind. He put his hand briefly on Eleanor's shoulder as he passed and went inside. Anna stood up approximately 6 seconds later. "I'm going to get some water," she said, and went down the steps in the other direction with the elaborate casualness of someone who was absolutely listening from around the corner of the building. Eleanor and Cole sat in the resulting quiet. "Why?" she asked. Directly this time, because she was too tired for anything else. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I watched you in that land office. The way you knew the property, the way you gave me information you had no reason to give me." He looked at the hat in his hands. "And then I found out you were marrying Harlan Driscoll, and I've known Harlan Driscoll's name for years, not from here. From up north, from men on the trail who've been on the wrong end of his dealings." He paused. It didn't sit right. "Things keep not sitting right with you," Eleanor said. "Generally." He said, "When something doesn't sit right, there's a reason." She looked at him for a long moment. At the set of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself, the fact that he had walked into a church full of Ridgeline's most influential people and said what needed to be said in the tone of a man reporting weather. "You took a risk," she said. "You've been in this town 3 weeks. You're trying to buy property here. Driscoll has connections." "He does," Cole agreed. "And you walked in there anyway." He looked at her. "Yes." "Why?" she asked again. Not the same question, a different layer of it. He held her gaze. "Because it was wrong," he said. "And somebody had to say so. Simple. No decoration, no performance." Eleanor breathed out slowly. She looked at the mountains on the northern horizon high and still the way they always were. The ridge where the Hatcher property sat was visible from here, a dark line against the summer sky. "You're going to have trouble with Driscoll now," she said. "Probably. He won't make buying that property easy." "Probably not." "You're not particularly worried about that." Cole considered this. "I've had harder problems," he said. She almost smiled. It surprised her, the almost smile, the fact that it was there at all. This morning, after everything, this morning had been. "Mr. Rigdon," she said. "Cole," he said. "If it's all the same." "Cole." She paused. "Thank you." He nodded once. The way he did everything direct, without excess. He stood, settled his hat on his head, and looked down at her on the step. "You'll want to get those papers filed with the Territorial Assessor's office before end of business today," he said. "Get ahead of anything Driscoll tries to claim about them." Back to practical. Back to what needed doing. She appreciated that more than she could have said. "I know," she said. "I'll go this afternoon." He nodded, touched the brim of his hat, turned toward his horse. "Cole," she said. He stopped. "The upper pasture on the Hatcher property," she said. "The flooding. It starts where the creek bends east about 40 yards north of the fence line. If you put a drainage channel there before August, you might save yourself a lot of trouble." He turned back and looked at her. Something in his expression that she couldn't quite name. Something that lived just underneath the steadiness. Something that had been there briefly at the land office and at the feed store, and now here. "I appreciate that," he said. "It's just information," she said. He held her gaze one moment longer. Then he walked to his horse mounted without hurry and rode north toward the ridge. Harlan Driscoll left Ridgeline 3 days later. Not quietly, and not without attempting to cause damage on the way out. He spent those 3 days making visits to the men in town. He had the most influence over the bank manager, the county clerk, 2 of the 3 town council members, and in each conversation he attempted to reframe what had happened in the church as a misunderstanding, a forgery, a stranger's interference in a legitimate private arrangement. It worked for about 48 hours on 2 of those 5 men. The other 3 were in the church and had watched Eleanor Marsh look Harlan Driscoll in the face and ask him a yes or no question he couldn't answer. Eleanor went to the Territorial Assessor's office that same Saturday afternoon as Cole had suggested. She filed the original payment records and the affidavits. The assessor, a dry-mannered man named Holbrook, who had known her father for 20 years, looked at the documentation for a long time and then looked at her over his glasses. "This is a serious claim," he said. "It's a serious fraud," she said. He looked at the papers again. "I'll need to verify with the bank directly." "The bank records clerk is named Briggs," Eleanor said. "He has the original ledger. He'll confirm." Holbrook was quiet for a moment. "Driscoll is going to push back." "I expect so. He has friends in this office, Miss Marsh." "I know." She met his eyes. "But you're not his friend, Mr. Holbrook. You're a fair man. That's why I came to you." The dry-mannered man looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and put the papers in his drawer and told her he would have a response by end of the following week. Harlan Driscoll came to the Marsh house that Sunday. Eleanor was alone in the front room when he knocked. Her father was at the Ennis place for a meeting about summer water rights. Anna was in the back garden. The younger children were somewhere upstairs. She heard the knock, and she knew before she opened the door who it was. She opened it anyway. He looked different than he had in the church. Still controlled, still wearing the manner of a powerful man, but something underneath it had loosened slightly the way a knot loosens when you pull on one specific end. "I want to talk to you without witnesses," he said. "Then you should have thought more carefully about your plan," she said. "Because there are currently 3 affidavits and a territorial assessor's review and several church full of people who watched you fail to answer a simple question. You no longer have the kind of situation that benefits from private conversation." His jaw was tight. "I could make this very difficult for your family." "You already tried that," she said. "We both saw how it worked out. There are other ways to make things difficult, Eleanor." She looked at him. She had been afraid of him 3 weeks ago. She had sat at a kitchen table at midnight and been afraid of him the way you are afraid of weather unavoidable coming regardless, and you can only brace and hope. She looked for that fear now and found something different in its place. Not confidence, not yet, but something clearer. Something that knew the shape of the thing it was dealing with. "My name is Miss Marsh," she said, "and you should leave this property." He stared at her. "Now," she said. He left. She closed the door, stood behind it with her hand flat on the wood for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen and put the kettle on because her hands needed something to do, and tea was the most normal thing she could think of. The weeks after the wedding that wasn't were strange in the particular way that Ridgeline managed strange things by talking about them constantly in every setting, except the one where the subject of conversation was present. Eleanor heard versions of what had happened refracted back to her through other people. She was brave. She was scandalous. She was clever. She was ungrateful. The cowboy was a hero. The cowboy was a troublemaker. The cowboy had his own designs on the Marsh property. That last one she dismissed because she had looked at his face when he laid those papers on the pastor's desk. And she knew the look of a man calculating property value, and it wasn't that. She saw Cole Rigdon twice in those first weeks briefly in passing. The first time was at the general store where he was buying lumber supplies, and she was settling her family's account now that the fraudulent debt cloud had been lifted. They exchanged nods. He held the door for her on the way out. She said thank you. He said of course. The second time was on the North Road, where she was coming back from the Ennis farm on foot after returning a borrowed harness. He was riding south. He slowed when he saw her. "Long walk," he said. "I don't mind walking," she said. He looked at the road ahead of her, then back. "I've got the horse." "I know." A pause, then, "Would you like a ride?" She looked at him. His expression was the same as it always was, steady present, not performing anything. Just a man on a horse asking a practical question about a practical situation. "Thank you," she said. She rode behind him on the bay horse, one hand holding the back of the saddle, and they didn't talk much, because Cole Rigdon was not a man who filled silence for the sake of filling it, and Eleanor had spent enough years in rooms full of people talking to know that comfortable quiet was something rare. He brought her to the end of the marsh lane and stopped. "I've been working on the drainage channel," he said, "north of the fence line, where you said the creek bends east." "Did it help?" "Won't know until August," he said, "but it looks right." She climbed down from the horse, looked up at him. "You could let me know when August comes." He looked at her. "I could," he said. "It would be good to know if the information was accurate." "Yes," he said. "It would." She almost smiled again. He noticed. The thing underneath his steadiness moved again briefly. "Thank you for the ride," she said. "Thank you for the directions," he said. He meant the drainage channel. He might have meant other things. She wasn't sure, and she didn't ask. She walked up the lane to the house, and she heard him ride back toward the north road, and she stood on the porch for a moment before going in. It occurred to her that she did not know very much about Cole Rigdon. She knew he had come from the north. She knew he was careful and honest, and not afraid of Harlan Driscoll. She knew he had spent 2 weeks in a bank's records office for a reason he hadn't fully explained. She knew that something about his face, the guarded quality of it, the particular kind of stillness, suggested a man who had experienced losses he didn't discuss. She did not know what those losses were, but she recognized the shape of them, because she had spent enough years looking at her own reflection to know what it looked like when someone had learned to carry something heavy without making it visible. She went inside. Her father was at the kitchen table. He looked up when she came in, and he had the expression he'd been wearing for 2 weeks, the expression of a man living in the aftermath of a mistake he hadn't known he was making. "You were on the North Road," he said. "I came back from the Ennis place. I saw you, with Rigdon." She went to the stove and checked the kettle. "He gave me a ride down the lane." Her father was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor." "Yes, Papa." "He's a good man," William Marsh said. "I think he's a good man." Eleanor looked at the kettle. "I think so too," she said. "I just wanted to say that," her father said. "After everything, I wanted to make sure I said it." She turned and looked at him, at his Sunday coat, that he still hadn't hung up, at the tired lines around his eyes, at the man who had loved her imperfectly and tried in the way he knew how. "I know," she said. She crossed the kitchen and kissed the top of his head, the way she had when she was small. "I know, Papa." She went to set the table for supper. The North Road was quiet now. The mountains held their place on the horizon, the same as always. And somewhere up on the ridge, she knew a careful man was building a drainage channel in ground that had been empty for 2 years, doing the steady, unglamorous work of making a broken thing whole again. She thought about August. She thought about what it would be like to hear whether the information was accurate. And underneath everything, underneath the relief and the exhaustion and the unfinished fear, something quiet had begun that she didn't have a name for yet, and she wasn't going to name it, not yet. Not until she knew whether it was the kind of thing that held. But she noticed it. She noticed it the way she noticed everything that mattered. Carefully, without letting on. Surviving the way she always had, one honest day at a time. August came the way Cole had said it would, with water. The creek north of the Hatcher Ridge line rose 3 inches in the first week of the month, fed by storms that rolled through the high passes and sent runoff cascading down through every drainage and gully between the peaks and the valley floor. Eleanor heard about it first from Martha Ennis, who heard it from the feed store owner who had spoken to one of the men working the upper range. The drainage channel held. She heard that too. Second-hand, then third-hand, and finally, directly. Because Cole came down from the ridge on the second Saturday of August, rode to the Marsh property line, and stood at the fence until she noticed him from the kitchen window. She went out. "The channel held," he said when she was close enough. "I heard," she said. "I'm glad." He nodded. He had his hat in his hands again, that habit of his taking the hat off when he was talking to her, as if she were someone who deserved the courtesy of his full face. The information was accurate. "Good," she said. "That matters to me." He looked at her. "Why?" She thought about it honestly. "Because I gave it to you without being asked, and I wanted it to be worth giving. Something shifted in his expression, that thing underneath the thing she had been learning to read without letting him know she was reading it. "It was worth giving," he said. They stood at the fence line in the August heat, and Eleanor thought about all the things she didn't know about Cole Rigdon, and about how she'd been thinking about those things for 6 weeks without letting herself do anything with the thinking. "My father is having supper with the Ennis family tonight," she said. "Anna and the children are going too. I'll be cooking for myself." Cole looked at her carefully. "You're welcome to eat here," she said, "if you haven't got anything waiting at the ranch." It was a practical invitation. She delivered it like one, but her heart was moving faster than practical, and she suspected he knew that because Cole Rigdon noticed things. "I haven't got anything waiting," he said. 6 o'clock, she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and put his hat back on and rode back up the north road. Eleanor went inside and stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hands on the counter. Then she started cooking because if her hands were busy, she couldn't think too hard about what she had just done, and right now, that was the best plan she had. He arrived at 6 o'clock exactly. She had expected that. A man who dug drainage channels in the right place at the right time was a man who arrived when he said he would. They ate at the kitchen table, the good dishes which she had gotten out, and then second-guessed, and then gotten out again, and talked about practical things. First, the way two careful people talk when they are circling something they haven't decided to name yet. The ranch. The upper pasture. Whether the cattle count would hold through the fall. The price of winter feed, and whether it was worth buying early. She asked him about the Hatcher property, what it had looked like when he first rode through it, what he thought it needed. He answered in the specific, unhurried way he answered everything. Told her about the fence lines, the condition of the barn, the well that needed relining. He had been working it alone since the purchase cleared, and it showed in his hands the same hands that had held those papers in the church, that had rested on the door of the land office, now roughened at the knuckles from 6 weeks of heavy work. "You've been doing it all yourself," she said. "I usually work alone," he said. "Is that preference or habit?" He considered the question the way he considered most things seriously without deflecting. "Both," he said. For a long time they felt like the same thing. She looked at him across the kitchen table. "And now," he met her eyes. "I'm not sure they do." The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of the evening coming on outside. Eleanor set down her fork. "How long ago did you lose her?" she asked. "Your wife." He went still. Not defensive, just still the way a man goes still when something he's been carrying gets named out loud by someone who isn't him. 7 years, he said. "What was her name?" "Margaret." He said it the way you say a name you've practiced keeping level. "She died in the winter. Fever. We were 3 days from the nearest doctor and the snow was—" He stopped, looked at his hands. "I couldn't get to him in time." "You blamed yourself," Eleanor said. "Everyone blamed me," he said. "The town did. Her family did." He paused. "I did." "And you left." "There wasn't anything left to stay for." He looked up. "I went north. Worked cattle on the open ranges for 3 years, then the high passes, then the ridge country." A pause. "It's easier up high. The mountains don't require you to be anyone in particular." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She thought about 6 weeks of second-hand information of standing at fence lines and exchanging practical observations of a man who had walked into a church full of people who could have made his life very difficult and said what needed to be said anyway. "You've been alone for 7 years," she said. "Yes," he said. "By choice." "By—" He stopped. Started again. By the time I had enough distance to see it clearly, being alone had become the only thing that felt safe. And men who've been alone long enough start to mistake safety for preference. Eleanor looked at him. "That's an honest thing to say." "You asked an honest question." She stood up and carried her plate to the wash basin. She stood at the basin for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, feeling the specific weight of 2 people in a kitchen who have both been carrying things for a long time. "My mother died when I was 16, she said without turning around. After that, I managed the accounts, the correspondence, the decisions my father couldn't make. I was good at it. And I told myself for years that I didn't mind that it was useful, that useful was enough. She paused. And then one morning I woke up and realized I had arranged my entire life around never needing anything I couldn't provide for myself. Because needing things that weren't guaranteed was terrifying. She turned around. Cole was watching her. That full present attention that she had never seen him direct anywhere carelessly. Terrifying, he repeated, quietly, like he recognized the word. Yes, she said. He stood up from the table. He didn't move toward her. He just stood and looked at her, and the kitchen held everything that hadn't been said yet with a kind of weight that Eleanor recognized as something she didn't want to walk away from. Eleanor, he said. Just her name. The first time he had used it. I know, she said. She didn't know what she was responding to, but she knew it was accurate. 3 days later, Harlan Driscoll came back to Ridgeline. Not in person, he was smarter than that now. He came back through his men. 3 of them whom Eleanor recognized from the Driscoll operation workers she had seen around town for years, men who understood which way the power ran and positioned themselves accordingly. The first sign was at the Territorial Assessor's office. Holbrook sent a message to the Marsh house informing Eleanor that the assessment review had been formally contested. A lawyer had filed a counterclaim on Driscoll's behalf, arguing that the payment records were forgeries and that the original debt documentation was legitimate. Eleanor sat with that letter for 20 minutes. Then she walked to the land office and asked to see Cole. He came out to the street to meet her because she'd told the clerk it was urgent, and something in her voice had communicated that she meant it. He read the letter standing on the boardwalk, and when he finished, he folded it and handed it back. He hired Cartwright, Cole said. She looked at him. You know the name. Territorial lawyer out of Denver, specializes in land disputes, expensive, effective. He was quiet for a moment. Driscoll isn't done. I knew he wasn't done, Eleanor said. I told you he wasn't done. You did, Cole agreed. I didn't disagree. What does Cartwright do? How does he work? Cole looked down the street thinking. He attacks the credibility of the documentation. He'll try to cast doubt on the affidavits, suggest the bank clerk Briggs had a reason to falsify, argue the original payment records are the forgeries rather than Driscoll's. He paused. It's not about the truth. It's about which version of the truth is easier to believe by November. November, she said. Why November? Territorial court session. If Cartwright can drag this into a formal court proceeding, the ruling comes in November. That gives Driscoll 4 months to pressure witnesses, buy opinions, and make life uncomfortable for anyone who's planning to testify against him. Cole looked at her steadily. He can't get the wedding he wanted, so he's going for the next best thing. Which is ruining it for you anyway. Eleanor breathed through her nose. She thought about the 3 affidavits. About Briggs, the bank records clerk, who had been helpful and specific and clearly uncomfortable with what he'd found in his own ledgers. About the 3 women at the church she'd noticed going still when Holbrook's name was mentioned, because Holbrook had ruled against their families in previous assessments, and they didn't trust him the way she did. He's going to go after Briggs, she said. That would be my guess, Cole said. Briggs is the weakest link. He's a bank employee. He has a family. He has a mortgage on his house that's held by... He stopped. Eleanor looked at him. Held by whom? Cole's expression did something complicated. The note on Briggs's mortgage. I saw it when I was going through the records. It was purchased 8 months ago from the original lender. He paused. By a land-holding company out of Denver. A land-holding company, Eleanor said slowly. One that I'd need to look at more carefully, he said. But given the timing, she said, Harlan Driscoll has been holding the mortgage on the only man who can confirm the original payment records for 8 months. She looked at Cole. Before any of this happened. Before he even approached my father. Before any of this happened, Cole confirmed. The street went on around them. Normal Tuesday morning in Ridgeline, a wagon going past. Two women on the far boardwalk in conversation. Ordinary life, ordinary noise, and underneath all of it, Eleanor standing on the boardwalk with the understanding that what had been done to her family was not impulsive, not opportunistic, not even particularly personal. It was a system, a structure built over time with patience and money to produce a specific outcome. He planned this, she said. Not weeks, months, maybe longer. Yes, Cole said. Which means there are probably other pieces we haven't found yet. Probably, Cole said. She looked at him. We need to talk to Briggs, today, before Cartwright's people do. Cole looked at her for a moment. Eleanor, if we go to Briggs and Driscoll finds out, he already knows we have Briggs's testimony, she said. That's why he filed the counterclaim. He's going to move on Briggs regardless of what we do. The only question is whether we get there first. Cole held her gaze. Then he said, All right. All right, she repeated. Let's go talk to Briggs, he said. She almost reached for his arm, stopped herself, turned toward the direction of the bank instead. He fell into step beside her, and neither of them mentioned the almost, and the morning moved fast around them with the particular energy of a situation that has stopped being theoretical. Briggs was behind his desk at the bank when they arrived, and the look on his face when he saw them together told Eleanor two things he had been expecting. Something, and it wasn't them. Miss Marsh, he said. He looked at Cole. Mr. Rigdon. We need 5 minutes, Eleanor said. In private. He looked at the bank floor manager's office door closed, occupied, and then back at them. He stood up. My lunch break is in 10 minutes, he said. The alley behind the mercantile. They waited. He arrived at the alley 8 minutes later, walking quickly with the specific body language of a man trying to look like he was doing nothing in particular. Cartwright's office sent a letter this morning, he said before Eleanor could speak. They want me to sign an amended statement, saying that the records I provided to Mr. Rigdon were incomplete, that I may have misread the ledger dates. And did you? Eleanor asked. No. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. I know what I read. I know what those records show. I was there when your father made his last payment. I logged it myself. He paused. But my mortgage. We know about the mortgage, Cole said. Briggs went still. How? Territorial records, Cole said. It's public filing. Driscoll's holding company purchased your note 8 months ago. The color shifted in Briggs's face. 8 months, he said more to himself than to them, before your father even came to him with a debt claim. He looked at Eleanor. Miss Marsh, I want you to know I didn't know who held the note when I gave Mr. Rigdon those records. I gave them because they were accurate, because what was done to your family. I know, Eleanor said quietly. I believe you, and I need to ask you something difficult. He waited. If Driscoll's lawyer pressures you to amend your statement, she said, what happens to your mortgage? Briggs's throat moved. If I cooperate with Cartwright, I've been given to understand that the note will be renewed on favorable terms. He paused. If I don't, I've been given to understand that it will be called in. Calling in your mortgage means losing your house, Eleanor said. Yes, he said. My wife, my 2 daughters. Eleanor looked at him. She had known this was the shape of it, but knowing the shape and standing in front of the human face of it were different things. She looked at a man who was honest and scared and caught between 2 versions of his own destruction. What if the note could be transferred? Cole said. Both Eleanor and Briggs looked at him. Cole's expression was careful and direct. If the mortgage on your property was purchased from Driscoll's holding company by another party, one not connected to Driscoll, the leverage disappears. Your testimony stands. Driscoll has nothing to threaten you with. Briggs stared at him. Who would purchase it? Cole met his eyes. I would. The alley was very quiet. Eleanor looked at Cole. He was looking at Briggs. His face was the face of a man who has thought something through and landed at a decision and is not reconsidering it. Cole, Eleanor said. That's a reasonable use of capital, he said. He still wasn't looking at her. I bought the Hatcher property with most of my savings, but I have enough left to buy a banknote at fair value. He looked at Briggs. I'd need to move quickly, before Cartwright's office follows up. Briggs looked at him for a long moment. Why would you do that? Cole was quiet for a second. Then, because Driscoll built this whole thing on the assumption that everyone he was dealing with had a price or a pressure point, and I'd like to demonstrate that the assumption is sometimes wrong. It was the most words Eleanor had heard him say at once. She stored all of them. How quickly? Briggs asked. This afternoon, Cole said. If you're willing. Briggs looked at Eleanor. She held his gaze and said nothing because this was his decision and she wasn't going to make it for him. He nodded. This afternoon, he said. By the end of that day, Briggs's mortgage note had transferred. By the following morning, Briggs had sent a formal letter to Cartwright's office, declining to amend his statement. Cartwright's response arrived 4 days later. It was addressed to Cole directly, and it was written in the precise, almost courteous language of a man who has decided to become a serious problem. Cole brought it to Eleanor. She read it at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee going cold beside her. When she finished, she set it down and looked at the wall for a moment. He's moving the challenge to the property line itself, she said. Yes, Cole said from across the table. He's claiming that the Marsh eastern boundary was incorrectly surveyed 20 years ago, that 2 of our most productive fields are actually on land adjacent to the Driscoll property. And if the fields are on Driscoll's land, the farming revenue from those fields over 20 years represents... She picked up the letter and checked the number. $1,100 in damages owed to Driscoll. Which your father cannot pay, Cole said. Which my father cannot pay. She set the letter down again. And if Cartwright gets a court judgment on that claim, it creates a legitimate debt. A real one this time. And Driscoll gets what he wanted after all, just through a different door. Cole looked at her. Eleanor. The original survey maps, she said. If we could find the original survey maps from 20 years ago, and if the boundary is drawn where we believe it is, the claim collapses. Survey maps from 20 years ago would be in the Territorial Land Registry, Cole said. Denver. I know. That's a 4-day round trip, minimum. I know, she said again. She picked up the letter, put it down, picked up her coffee, put that down too. I know things that nobody else in this county knows about land boundaries, Cole. My father surveyed this property himself when I was 6 years old. He walked every fence line. He described it to me. He made me memorize the corner stakes. She looked up. I know where those stakes are. I know where the line runs. I need the map to prove what I already know. Cole watched her for a long moment. I'll go to Denver, he said. No, she said. I'll go to Denver. He blinked. It was the closest thing to surprise she had ever seen on his face. Alone. You have a ranch to run, she said. You've already spent 2 weeks in records offices and bought a bank mortgage on my family's behalf. I'm not asking you to ride to Denver for me as well. You're not asking, he said. I'm offering. Cole, you said you memorized the boundary descriptions, he said. I need someone who knows what they're looking for when we find the maps. And I know the Denver registry. I pulled records from there 3 months ago. He held her gaze. Together, we find it faster, and we come back faster. That matters, because Cartwright filed his claim on Monday, and the court date is 11 weeks away. She looked at him. She thought about practical things, the propriety of it, what the town would say, what her father would think. She thought about those things for approximately 4 seconds. Then she thought about 11 weeks and a fraudulent boundary claim and what happened to her family if Driscoll won. When do we leave? She said. Tomorrow morning, he said. Early. She nodded. I'll tell my father tonight. Her father's response when she told him was a long silence followed by, Cole Rigdon is going with you. Yes. Just the 2 of you. Yes, Papa. Another silence. Then William Marsh looked at his daughter. Really looked at her in the way he hadn't for too many years, with the full attention of a man who was finally seeing something he'd been too busy or too proud or too afraid to see before. "He's a good man," her father said. "You said that before," Eleanor said. "I'm saying it again." William paused. "Because I want you to hear it from me without any other thing attached to it. No conditions. No arrangements." He looked at her steadily. "He's a good man, Eleanor, and you deserve good things." Eleanor stood very still for a moment. Then she crossed the kitchen and hugged her father quickly, firmly, the way you hug someone when words are insufficient, and went to pack for Denver. They left before sunrise. The town was asleep when they rode out, which Eleanor appreciated because she was not in the mood to manage anyone's interpretation of two people riding north together in the early morning dark. Cole rode beside her, not ahead, which she noticed. He set the pace to match her horse, not his own. Small things. The kind of things she had been cataloging about him for 2 months without letting herself do anything with the catalog. They had been riding for an hour when he said, "There's something I need to tell you, about why I came to Ridgeline in the first place." She looked at him. "The Hatcher property," he said. "I didn't find it by accident. I'd been looking at properties in this part of the territory for a year, specifically in areas where Driscoll had been operating." Eleanor's horse moved under her. She steadied it. "What?" "I knew Driscoll's name before I came here," Cole said. "I told you that. What I didn't tell you was why. 3 years ago, I was ranching in the North Ranges. There was a family named Whitfield. Good people. Small operation. Driscoll moved into the area, and the same thing happened, manufactured debt pressure to sell property absorbed into Driscoll's holdings." He paused. "The Whitfield's son was 17 years old when his family lost their land. He worked on my range for 2 years after, saved enough to buy a small plot on the lower pasture." He was quiet for a moment. "In February, that boy hung himself." The morning was very still around them. "Cole?" Eleanor said. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," he said, and his voice was even, but underneath, it was something that had been carried a long time. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know why I walked into that church. It wasn't purely on your behalf. Some of it was for him, for the Whitfields, for everyone who lost something to that man before anyone stood up and said no." Eleanor rode beside him and thought about what it meant that a man who had already lost so much had walked back into the kind of situation that cost people things for a boy who was already gone for a family he'd never met for the principle of it. "You could have told me this before," she said. "I know," he said. "I wasn't sure how." "Cole." She waited until he looked at her. "Thank you for telling me now." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the road ahead, and something in the set of his shoulders changed very slightly, the way something changes when you've been holding it tightly for a long time, and someone tells you it's all right to put it down. "He would have done the same to your family," Cole said. "Not just your father, your sisters, your brother, the boy." 20 years from now, Thomas would have been working someone else's land instead of his own. Anna would have married whoever she could afford to marry. And every person Driscoll touched would have passed the damage on without even knowing where it started. He paused. "That's what these men do. They don't just take the land, they take the future." Eleanor looked at the road ahead, the mountains on both sides, the sky turning from black to gray at the edges. "Then we'd better make sure he doesn't get to keep it," she said. Cole looked at her. In the early light, she could see his face clearly, the tiredness in it, the steadiness, the thing underneath, that she had been learning the shape of for 2 months. "Yes," he said. "We'd better." They rode on into the morning, and the road stretched ahead of them toward Denver, and somewhere in the distance, the Territorial Land Registry held a 20-year-old survey map that was the last piece of what they needed. And Eleanor Marsh rode beside Cole Rigdon in the early gray dawn, with her spine straight and her hands steady on the reins, and felt for the first time since the morning her father hadn't asked her to sit down, like the future was something she was riding toward, rather than something being decided for her. She held that feeling carefully, the way she held everything that mattered. But this time, for the first time in a long time, she let herself hold it without immediately calculating how it could be taken away. The Denver Territorial Land Registry smelled like old paper and lamp oil, and the particular kind of institutional quiet that exists in places where records are kept and arguments are settled by what can be proven on a page. Eleanor had been in places like this before, smaller versions, county offices, assessors' rooms, but never one this size. The registry occupied the entire second floor of the territorial building, and the clerk who received them at the front counter had the measured expression of a man who had seen every kind of desperation walk through his door and had developed a professional immunity to all of it. Cole stepped up to the counter. "We need land survey records. Ridgeline County, Colorado Territory. Original boundary surveys filed between 1855 and 1862. The clerk looked at him. "That's a wide range." "We'll narrow it when we see what's there," Cole said. The clerk looked at Eleanor, then back at Cole. Something in the pairing of them, the specificity of the request, the early hour, the road dust still on their coats, made him decide not to ask questions. "Room 3, he said. "I'll pull the boxes." They sat across from each other at a long table, while the clerk brought 4 wooden crates of filed documents, each one stuffed with folded survey maps, handwritten boundary descriptions, and the occasional deed amendment that had been misfiled and never corrected. Eleanor pulled the first crate toward her without waiting. "I'll start with 55 through 58, she said. "You take 59 through 62. "What am I looking for specifically?" "Corner stake descriptions," she said, already opening the first folded map. "My father described the northeast corner as running to a granite outcrop approximately 60 yards east of the creek bend. If the original survey shows that reference point Cartwright's boundary claim fails, the Driscoll parcel doesn't reach the creek bend. It stops 40 yards short." Cole pulled the second crate toward him and started working. They worked in silence for the first hour, which was not uncomfortable silence. It was the focused quiet of 2 people doing the same thing with the same urgency, and Eleanor had worked in that kind of quiet with her father for years and knew the rhythm of it. Beside her, Cole moved through the documents with the same systematic patience she had seen him apply to everything else. Methodical. Nothing skipped. Nothing assumed. She found it on the third map of the second box. "Cole." He looked up immediately. She turned the map so he could see it. Her finger was on the northeast corner description, handwritten in the cramped, precise script of a government surveyor, dated May of 1859, signed and witnessed. "Northeast corner, granite outcrop formation, creek bend, east reference 60 yards. "That's it," Cole said. "That's it," she confirmed. He stood up and came around the table to look at it properly, standing beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. He read the description twice. Checked the boundary line drawn on the map. Checked the parcel number against the deed reference she had been carrying in her coat pocket for 3 days. "This collapses the entire claim," he said. "Yes," she said. "Cartwright's survey puts the northeast corner 38 yards west of this reference point, which means the boundary he's claiming puts the Driscoll parcel overlapping marshland by nearly 40 yards. But this map," she touched the paper, "this map shows the line exactly where my father always said it was." Cole straightened up. He was still standing close to her, and he didn't step back, and Eleanor didn't move away. "We need a certified copy," he said. "The clerk can notarize it." "I know," she said. "I also need a copy of the parcel number index so we can show the chain of title is unbroken." He looked down at her. "You've already thought about how to use it in court." "I've been thinking about it for 3 days, she said. Something crossed his face, that thing she had learned to recognize, the thing that lived underneath the steadiness. "Eleanor." She looked up at him. "You would have found a way through this without me," he said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was something more like a recognition, an accounting of something true. "Maybe," she said. "But it would have taken longer, and it would have been harder." She held his gaze. "I'm not going to pretend that having someone beside me didn't matter, because it did." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "It mattered to me too." The registry room was very still around them. She turned back to the map. "Let's get the copies made," she said. "I want to be back in Ridgeline before Cartwright knows we were here." Cole nodded and went to find the clerk. Eleanor stood alone at the table for a moment, with her hand resting on the 20-year-old survey map that had just saved her family's land, and she breathed slowly and fully for the first time in 3 days. Then she folded the map carefully and got to work. They were back in Ridgeline in 4 days. Not the minimum 4 that Cole had estimated. They had pushed hard starting before dawn on the return leg, stopping only when the horses needed it. Eleanor had not complained once, which Cole had not expected her to, and she had not disappointed him. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Eleanor went directly to Holbrook's office at the assessor's building with the certified survey copy in her hand and Cole beside her. Holbrook looked at the map for a long time. He looked at the notarization, the parcel index, the chain of title. Then he looked at Eleanor over his glasses and said, "This settles the boundary question conclusively." "Yes," Eleanor said. "It does." "Cartwright's claim was filed with the territorial court Monday," Holbrook said. "This counter-evidence will need to be formally entered before the court session opens the file." "How long do we have?" Holbrook checked his calendar. 14 days. "That's enough time," Eleanor said. "Miss Marsh." Holbrook set the papers down. He had the expression of a man who has been in this office for 20 years and has seen a lot of people come through it, and who has specific feelings about what he was looking at now. What Driscoll has done, the manufactured debt, the mortgage leverage on Briggs, now this fraudulent survey claim, this is not a civil matter anymore. This is a pattern, a deliberate documented pattern of fraud across multiple parties. "I know," Eleanor said. "The Territorial Attorney General's office would be very interested in this documentation." "I was planning to contact them," Eleanor said, "after the court counter-filing." Holbrook looked at her, then at Cole, then back at Eleanor. "You've built a strong case," he said, and his voice had something in it that was not quite surprise, but was close to it. "A very strong case." "We had good records," Eleanor said, "and a good starting point." She glanced briefly at Cole. "And help." Cole said nothing. He was looking at the wall above Holbrook's desk, which was his way of being present without inserting himself into something that was hers. "I'll prepare the counter-filing documentation," Holbrook said. "You'll need a lawyer to submit it formally." "Do you have a recommendation?" Eleanor asked. "Someone not connected to Driscoll." Holbrook thought for a moment. "Judge Harding's former clerk. Man named Avery. He practices in the county seat now. Honest man. He'll understand what this is." "Thank you," Eleanor said. She gathered the papers, stood, extended her hand across the desk. Holbrook shook it, which was not. Eleanor knew something he did automatically with women who came into his office and which meant something accordingly. She and Cole walked out into the afternoon. On the boardwalk they stopped. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The town moved around them in its ordinary Thursday way, people going places, work being done, the world conducting its business without reference to the 5 months of sustained fraud that had been dismantled piece by piece in county records rooms and church aisles and bank alley meetings. "It's not over," Cole said. "No?" Eleanor agreed. "Cartwright will file a response to the counter-evidence. Driscoll will find something else to try. It won't be clean or fast." "But the core of it is done," Cole said. "The debt was false. The boundary claim is false. The documentation is clear. Whatever Driscoll tries from here, he's building on air." Eleanor looked at the street. Then she said quietly, "He hurt a lot of people before he got to us." "Yes," Cole said. "The Whitfields," she said. "Others like them. Yes. The Attorney General's case," she said. "If it goes forward, it won't bring anything back for them." "No," Cole said. "It won't." He paused. "But it stops the next one." She nodded. That was the thing you had to hold on to, she had learned. Not justice for what was already lost. That was too much to ask of a legal system, and she had known it long enough not to be devastated by it. But prevention. The possibility that whoever came after the Whitfields, whoever Driscoll had been building toward before he encountered a records clerk named Briggs, and a woman who memorized boundary descriptions, that person got to keep their land. That was worth fighting for. "I need to go home," she said. "Tell my father." "Go," Cole said. "I'll take care of the horses." She looked at him. "Cole." "Eleanor." "Thank you," she said. "For Denver. For all of it." He held her gaze. "You're welcome," he said. And the simplicity of it, the complete absence of deflection or minimization, hit her in the way that simple, honest things do when you've been surrounded by complexity for a long time. She walked home. Her father cried. She hadn't expected that. William Marsh was not a man who cried, or rather, he was a man who had trained himself over 61 years and significant practice to process difficult things internally and present the results after the fact. She had not seen him cry since her mother's funeral. He read the certified survey copy at the kitchen table, and halfway through reading it, his jaw went tight and his eyes went bright, and he set the paper down and pressed his hand over his face. "Papa," Eleanor said. "I'm all right," he said. His voice was entirely steady. Only his hand covering his face gave anything away. "I'm all right." She sat down beside him and didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say. Sometimes people needed to feel the full weight of what had almost happened and what had been stopped, and the only useful thing you could do was sit beside them and let them. After a minute, he took his hand down. His face was composed again, except for the brightness at his eyes that he was not going to acknowledge. "Tell me how you found it," he said. She told him. All of it: Denver, the registry, the 4 crates of survey maps, the notation about the granite outcrop and the creek bend that matched exactly what he had described to her when she was 6 years old, walking the fence line beside him while he pointed at corner stakes and told her to memorize them. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I taught you about the boundary markers because I thought you'd need it someday for the running of the farm. I didn't know you'd need it to save the farm. You taught me a lot of things that turned out to matter more than we knew," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "Cole Rigdon went to Denver with you." "Yes." 4 days with you on the road." "Yes, Papa." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is there something I should know between you and him?" Eleanor considered the question honestly. She thought about the kitchen supper, the fence line conversations, the early morning on the road to Denver gray light, and Cole's voice telling her about the Whitfield boy, the most words she'd ever heard him say, the trust that was in that. The moment in the registry room when he'd stood beside her and told her she would have found a way through this without him, and she had told him it mattered having him beside her, and he had said it mattered to him too. "There might be," she said. "I'm not sure yet." Her father nodded slowly. He had the expression of a man who was being careful with something he knew was delicate and wanted to handle correctly. "He's a good man," William said, for the 3rd time. "I mean it differently each time I say it. The first time I said it because I felt guilty and I wanted to put something good on the record. The second time because I wanted you to hear it without conditions. This time," he looked at her directly, "this time I'm saying it because I think you need to hear it from someone who made a terrible mistake and knows it. Someone who loves you. You deserve someone good, Eleanor. You've been taking care of everyone else long enough." Eleanor's throat tightened. She pressed her lips together and looked at the table and did not cry because she was her father's daughter, and that particular reflex ran in the family. "Thank you, Papa," she said. He patted her hand once firmly the way he used to when she was small and had done something right. "Now, tell me what happens next with the court filing." She told him that too. Cartwright's response to the counterfiling came 8 days later. It was as Cole had predicted, an attack on the documentation. The certified survey copy was contested on the grounds that the notarization was from a Denver office with no direct jurisdiction over Ridgeline County. The chain of title was challenged on a technicality involving a deed amendment from 1863 that Cartwright claimed superseded the original survey. The filing was 50 pages long and contained 11 separate legal arguments, each one individually manageable and collectively designed to make the whole thing feel overwhelming. Eleanor read it at the kitchen table at midnight. She was on her second reading when she heard boots on the porch step. She didn't look up. "Come in, Cole." The door opened. He came in and sat down across from her, the same chair he'd taken at supper 6 weeks ago, and she pushed half the document across the table to him, without saying anything. They read for an hour. "The 1863 deed amendment," Cole said finally. "I know," Eleanor said. "That's the one that concerns me. It was filed after your father purchased the property. It's a standard boundary clarification, but Cartwright's reading of it would move the northeast corner to match his survey." "It's a bad reading," Eleanor said. "The amendment was clarifying the western boundary. It has nothing to do with the northeast corner. But if a judge reads it quickly—" "It needs an annotation," Cole said. "Someone who understands deed amendments needs to walk the court through why that reading is incorrect." "Avery can do that," Eleanor said. "He's been reading land deeds for 15 years. It'll take time to prepare. We have 6 days before the pre-trial filing deadline." Cole looked at her. "Have you slept?" "I'll sleep when this is filed," she said. "Eleanor." "Cole." She met his eyes across the table. "I know my limits. I'm not there yet." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he pulled the document fully toward him. "Then let's work through the rest of it." She passed him a pencil. They worked until 3 in the morning. At some point, Anna appeared in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, looked at the two of them at the table, surrounded by papers, and retreated without saying anything, but not before Eleanor saw the small, private smile her sister was trying to suppress. At 3 o'clock, Cole said, "There's one argument in here we haven't answered." Eleanor looked at the section he was pointing to. It was on page 41, buried in the section about deed succession, and it was the most dangerous thing Cartwright had written. Not because it was legally strong, it wasn't, but because it was personally targeted. It alleged that Eleanor Marsh had a personal relationship with Cole Rigdon that constituted a conflict of interest in the evidence she had gathered. That the survey records had been procured through a romantic arrangement, not legitimate legal inquiry. That Eleanor's credibility as a witness was compromised. She stared at the page. "He's attacking you," Cole said. His voice was quiet and even, but underneath it was something that had gone very still. "He's attacking the evidence by attacking me," Eleanor said. "It's a lie." "It's Cartwright. He doesn't need it to be true. He needs it to be a question." She set the paper down. "If a judge considers the question even briefly, the survey records become disputed. Disputed evidence gets weighed differently." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I should have anticipated this." "Neither of us anticipated it," Eleanor said. "It doesn't matter. What matters is how we answer it." "How do you answer something like that?" He said it carefully, but the tightness in his voice told her the carefully was costing him something. "Briggs," she said. "Briggs was present when you first requested the records. He can testify that the request came through him through official bank channels with no involvement from me at that stage. The original inquiry was yours, not mine, before we had any formal, She stopped. "Before we had anything between us that anyone could call personal." She heard the end of that sentence in the silence, and so did he. "Eleanor," Cole said. "I know," she said. "What we have will—" He started and then stopped because Cole Rigdon did not say things he hadn't fully worked out yet, and he was still working this out. She waited. "What we have," he said again more carefully, "is not a romantic arrangement. It is not a compromise of your integrity, or your evidence, or your credibility." He looked at her directly. What it is becoming, I don't have a word for yet. But I know what it is not. And I am not willing to let Cartwright's reading of it stand." She looked at him across the midnight table with the legal papers between them and the lamp burning low. "Neither am I," she said. "Then we answer it through Briggs," Cole said. "And through the documentary chain, and through Avery making the argument clearly in court that the procurement of evidence and the personal lives of the people involved in a case are separate questions." "Yes," Eleanor said. "That's the answer." Good. He looked at the document. Let's finish. They finished at 4:30 in the morning. The pre-trial filing was submitted with 3 days to spare. Avery, who was, as Holbrook had promised, an honest man, read the full package and said it was the most comprehensively documented land fraud case he had seen in 15 years of territorial practice. He said it in the specific, careful way of a man who did not use superlatives carelessly, and Eleanor noted it accordingly. He also said the personal attack on Eleanor's credibility was the weakest argument in Cartwright's filing and the one most likely to backfire. Judges don't like it, Avery said, when a party with a documented pattern of fraud also attempts to impugn the character of the person who uncovered that fraud. It draws attention back to the fraud. Cartwright knows that, Cole said. Cartwright is hoping the judge he draws is one who doesn't like women in records offices. Avery said with the bluntness of a man who had been in enough courtrooms to know what that meant. It's a gamble. It may not pay. We'll need to be prepared for it either way, Eleanor said. Yes, Avery said. Miss Marsh, I may need you to testify. She looked at him. About the survey records. About all of it. The initial debt claim. Your father's response. What you knew when you knew it, how you verified it. Juries. He paused. Courts respond to people. To faces and voices and the way someone carries themselves when they're telling the truth. He studied her for a moment. You carry yourself very well. Eleanor thought about standing in the church with her chin at the correct angle and not letting anything show on her face. She thought about all the years of being precise and clear and composed because those were the tools she had. All right, she said. Tell me what you need me to say. The court date was set for the 3rd week of September. In the 6 weeks between the pre-trial filing and the hearing, 3 things happened that changed the shape of everything. The first was that the Territorial Attorney General's office contacted Avery and requested copies of the full documentation package. They had been watching the Driscoll situation. They said there were other counties, other cases, a pattern that had been difficult to prove until now. The Ridgeline case gave them what they needed. Avery told Eleanor this over a meeting in his office, and Eleanor sat with it for a long moment before responding. How many other families, she said. Avery looked at his desk. At least 6 that they've identified, possibly more. She thought about the Whitfields, about a 17-year-old boy who had worked Cole's range for 2 years. All right, she said. Tell them they can have everything. The second thing that happened was that Harlan Driscoll, 3 weeks before the court date, filed a motion to settle. Eleanor was in the kitchen when Cole brought her the letter. She read it once, set it down, and read it again, to make sure she was understanding it correctly. Driscoll was offering to drop the boundary claim repay, a sum equivalent to the cost of the fraudulent debt documentation he had produced, and formally acknowledge that the Marsh land debt had been settled prior to his involvement in exchange for Eleanor withdrawing her cooperation with the Attorney General's investigation. She set the letter down. No, she said. Cole looked at her. No, she said again more clearly. The Attorney General's case isn't mine to withdraw. And even if it were... She pushed the letter away from her. No, absolutely not. Cole picked up the letter and read it. Set it down. He's scared, Cole said. The Attorney General's involvement changes his exposure significantly. This isn't a local land dispute anymore. This is a territorial fraud case. Good, Eleanor said. He'll escalate, Cole said. When this doesn't work, he'll try something else. I know, Eleanor said. I've known that since the church. Cole looked at her across the kitchen table. He had a quality in moments like this of looking at her as if she were a thing he was still in the process of understanding, not a problem to solve, but a fact to reckon with the way you reckon with the specific weight of ground that turns out to be solid. You're not afraid of him anymore, Cole said. I was never afraid of him specifically, Eleanor said. I was afraid of losing the house, of my family having nowhere to go. She paused. That's different. Harlan Driscoll is just a man who counted on other people being afraid of the wrong things for the right reasons. He doesn't count for much when you separate him from the fear. Cole was quiet for a moment. "Margaret used to say something like that," he said. It was the first time he had mentioned her without Eleanor prompting it. She went carefully. "What did she say?" Eleanor asked. "That most bad things only have power if you give them the same room in your head as the good things." He paused. "She was braver than I was. She wasn't afraid of much." A pause smaller. "She would have liked you." Eleanor held that with both hands carefully, the way you hold something fragile that has been given to you unexpectedly. "I think I would have liked her," she said. Cole looked at the table, then at her. Something in his face that she had never seen there before, not grief exactly, because grief was something he had learned to carry quietly, but something adjacent to relief, like a door opening in a room that had been sealed a long time. "Cole," she said. "I know," he said. For the second time he said that "I know" in response to something she hadn't finished. For the second time it was accurate. The third thing that happened on a Tuesday evening 12 days before the court date was that Cole Rigdon came to the Marsh house and asked her father if he could speak with Eleanor privately. Her father looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll take the children to see the Ennis family." And he did with a speed that suggested he had been waiting for exactly this moment. Eleanor and Cole stood in the front room. He had his hat in both hands. That habit she had catalogued on the very first day in the land office hat, off both hands, full face, complete attention. "I am not a man who talks around things," he said. "I know," she said. "What I have to say, I've been working out how to say it for a while." "I've noticed," she said. "Take your time." He looked at her. "I came to Ridgeline with one purpose. I had one clear thing I wanted to do, and I was going to do it, and go back to the ranch and keep living the way I'd been living, alone, on the ridge, which was—" He stopped, started again, "which I had convinced myself was sufficient." "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "I get up every morning and the first thing I think about is whether there's a reason to come down from the ridge." He held her gaze without flinching. "There usually is. And it's usually you." Eleanor looked at him. She thought about all the ways she had been careful for 27 years. All the ways she had arranged herself not to need things that weren't guaranteed. She thought about this question he had asked her outside the land office. "Is it what you want?" And how no one had ever asked her that before. She crossed the room. She took the hat from his hands and set it on the chair beside her and looked up at him. "I'm not easy," she said. "I have opinions about boundary surveys, and I manage accounts in my head, and I will argue with you when I think you're wrong." "I know," he said. "A different kind of I know, the kind that meant yes, and I'm not going to arrange my life around anyone's convenience again," she said. "Not even yours." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm asking you to let me stand beside you while you build the life you should have had. Which is—" He paused. "Which is not the same thing as asking you to need me. I know you don't need me." "I don't need you," she agreed. "But I want you there." She watched something in his face change. Something she had been watching change slowly for 3 months. One careful degree at a time. The way ground thaws in spring, invisible until suddenly it isn't. He put his hand against her face, very gently. The roughened knuckles, the working hands that had dug drainage channels and pulled bank records and held evidence on a pastor's desk, against her cheek entirely still. She put her hand over his. "Cole?" she said. "Eleanor," he said. And then neither of them said anything else for a while because some things don't need language, and Cole Rigdon had always understood that. Outside, the September evening came down over the Marsh property, and the North Road, and the ridge where the Hatcher Ranch sat waiting, and the mountains held their place against the sky unchanged, and certain the way they always had. And inside the front room, 2 people who had both learned to carry loss quietly stood with their hands joined, and let themselves finally put some of it down. The court date arrived on a Tuesday. Eleanor was dressed before dawn. Not in her second-best dress, not in the gray wedding dress that had never been worn and had been given away to Dora Phelps for alterations into something else entirely. She wore her best day dress, dark blue clean lines, the one she had always felt most like herself in, and she stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and watched the road lighten as the sun came up, and she was not afraid. She had expected to be afraid. She had been afraid of so many things over the past 5 months. The debt, the wedding, Harlan Driscoll's quiet threats, Cartwright's legal machinery, the personal attack buried on page 41 of a 50-page filing. She had carried fear alongside everything else the way you carry something heavy when you have no choice but to keep walking. But standing in the kitchen on the morning of the court date, she searched herself for fear and found something else instead. Something steadier. The feeling of a person who has done the work, checked the numbers 3 times, and knows what the ground is made of. Cole arrived at 6:30. He knocked, which he always did, and she called him in, which she always did, and he came into the kitchen and took his hat off and looked at her the way he had been looking at her for 12 days, with everything changed between them, and everything still careful. The way careful things are when they are real, and you don't want to break them by moving too fast. "How are you?" he asked. "Ready," she said. He looked at her for a moment, nodded. "Then let's go." Her father came down the stairs in his Sunday coat. Anna was already up, standing in the kitchen doorway with Thomas beside her. The younger children were still asleep, and Eleanor was glad she didn't want them in a courtroom today carrying the weight of it. "We'll be there when you come out," Anna said. "You don't need to come," Eleanor said. "I know I don't need to," Anna said. "I'm coming anyway." Eleanor looked at her sister, 17 and sharp, and entirely certain, and felt the specific warmth of being loved by someone who doesn't need to be asked. "All right," Eleanor said. "Come on then." They walked to the county courthouse in the early morning. The 5 of them, and the town was just beginning its day around them, and Eleanor walked with her spine straight, and Cole beside her, and she did not look at anyone's face, except forward. And Avery was waiting on the courthouse steps. He had the particular alert stillness of a lawyer on a court morning. Not nervous, just calibrated, every part of him oriented toward what was coming. "There's news," he said before Eleanor could speak. She stopped. "What kind?" "The Attorney General's office filed a parallel motion this morning," Avery said. "Criminal fraud charges against Driscoll, separate from our civil case. They're requesting the court consider the 2 matters jointly. Eleanor processed this. Cartwright will object." "Cartwright already objected," Avery said. "The judge denied the objection 20 minutes ago." He paused. "Judge Harding is presiding." Cole made a sound very quiet, barely audible. Eleanor looked at him. "Harding," Cole said. "He ruled against the Whitfield family." The morning went sharp around them. Eleanor looked at Avery. "Is that a problem?" Avery's expression was measured. "Harding is a careful man. He ruled against the Whitfields because they had insufficient documentation. They didn't have what we have." He held Eleanor's gaze. "What we have is comprehensive. I've appeared before Harding 14 times. He follows the evidence. That's what we need." "But Driscoll knows Harding ruled in his favor before," Eleanor said. "Yes," Avery said, "which is probably why Cartwright agreed to this jurisdiction rather than petitioning for a change of venue." He let that settle for a moment. "They think Harding is friendly. I think they've miscalculated." Eleanor looked at the courthouse door, then at Cole. He was already looking at her. "All right," she said. "Let's go in." The courtroom was half full, which surprised her. She had expected the county clerk, the 2 opposing parties, their lawyers, and the judge. She had not expected the rows of townspeople, men and women she recognized from Ridgeline and from neighboring properties, sitting in the gallery, with the contained attention of people who understood that what happened in this room today would matter beyond the people immediately involved. She saw Briggs sitting in the 3rd row. He nodded when she came in. She nodded back. She saw Martha Ennis, who caught her eye and put her hand briefly over her heart, a small private gesture of solidarity that Eleanor held on to. She saw 3 men she didn't recognize sitting together near the back, and Avery murmured as they passed, Attorney General's representatives. She filed that away. She did not look for Harlan Driscoll until she had to. When she did, he was at the opposing table with Cartwright, and he looked for the first time since she had known him like a man in a genuinely uncertain situation. Not frightened. Men like Driscoll didn't get frightened in public, but uncertain. The careful composure of a man running calculations he wasn't fully confident in. Cartwright beside him looked exactly the same as he had in every document, precise, professional, entirely comfortable. He was the most dangerous thing in the room, and he knew it and didn't need to demonstrate it. Cole settled beside her at their table and leaned close enough to say very quietly, "Whatever happens in the next few hours, you have already won the part that matters." She looked at him. "Your family's land is documented," he said. "The debt was false. The boundary claim is false. The record exists. Even if today goes badly, which it won't, those facts don't disappear." "I know," she said. "I just wanted to say it," he said. "Before we went in." She pressed her hand briefly over his on the table, just for a moment. Then she folded her hands in front of her and straightened in her chair and looked at the front of the courtroom, and she was ready. Judge Harding entered.
"Yep, coming."
The first hour of the hearing was procedural filings. Reviewed objections entered the Attorney General's parallel motion formally acknowledged and integrated into the record. Cartwright objected to the joint consideration 3 separate times. Harding denied all 3 objections in the same even unhurried tone, and Eleanor watched Cartwright's expression recalibrate slightly after the 3rd denial. The second hour was Cartwright's case. He was good. Eleanor had expected him to be good, and he was methodical, precise, and skilled at making complex fraud look like a simple misunderstanding. He presented Driscoll's version of the debt documentation with such assured calm that Eleanor heard murmuring in the gallery behind her and understood how jurors and judges could be led astray by the confidence of a man presenting lies in the right tone of voice. She kept her face still throughout. Cole beside her was equally still. Avery made notes. Cartwright's treatment of the boundary claim was technically sophisticated. He walked the court through the 1863 deed amendment, slowly, deliberately, and Eleanor could see the judge following the argument with careful attention. She could see exactly what Cartwright was doing, could see where the argument was wrong, and had to trust that Avery could dismantle it clearly enough that the judge would see it too. When Cartwright arrived at the personal attack on Eleanor, the conflict of interest allegation, the suggestion that the survey records had been obtained through a romantic arrangement, he delivered it quietly and almost apologetically, like a man who regretted the necessity but felt duty-bound. Eleanor heard Cole's breathing change beside her. Barely. She pressed her foot very gently against his under the table. "Steady. Wait." He steadied. Then Avery stood up. Eleanor had seen Avery work in his office. She had seen him read documents and draft arguments and explain legal strategy with the careful clarity of a man who respected the people he was explaining things to. She had not seen him in a courtroom. He was different in a courtroom. Not louder. Not more theatrical. He was simply entirely himself in the specific way that some people become entirely themselves when they are doing the thing they were built for. Every word was exactly the right word. Every pause was exactly the right length. He walked the judge through the documented chain of evidence with the calm authority of a man who had nothing to hide and everything to show. And Eleanor watched Judge Harding follow him the way you follow someone who knows where they're going. The debt documentation, primary bank records, Briggs's sworn testimony, the timeline of payments. Airtight. The boundary claim, the 1859 survey map, the certified copy, the parcel index, the full chain of title with the 1863 deed amendment annotated clearly and correctly to show that it addressed only the western boundary and had no bearing whatsoever on the northeast corner. The judge asked 2 questions. Avery answered both of them without hesitation. Then Avery addressed the personal attack. "Mr. Cartwright has suggested," Avery said in a tone that managed to be both respectful and devastating, "that the credibility of this documentation is compromised by a personal relationship between the witnesses. I would like to draw the court's attention to 2 facts. The first is that the initial records request was filed by Mr. Cole Rigdon through official bank channels, witnessed by bank clerk James Briggs, before any personal association between Mr. Rigdon and Miss Marsh had developed. The second is that the documentation itself, the original 1859 survey map, the bank ledger, the chain of title records exists independently of any person who found it. A map drawn in 1859 does not become false because of who retrieved it in 1879. He paused. What is actually being asked by this line of argument, Avery continued, is that the court discount 20-year-old objective documentation because of the character of the woman who knew where to look for it. I trust the court will recognize what that argument is and what it is not. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Harding looked at Cartwright. Do you wish to respond to that characterization, Counselor? Cartwright said, The argument stands on its legal merits, Your Honor. I've read your filing, Harding said. I'm familiar with the legal merits. His tone did not change. He made a note. Continue, Mr. Avery. Eleanor exhaled very slowly and looked at the table and let herself feel for just a moment the specific relief of watching something built with care do the thing it was built to do. Yeah, Eleanor testified for 40 minutes. She had rehearsed it with Avery twice, but when she was actually in the chair speaking to Judge Harding directly, the rehearsal fell away and she just told the truth. The same way she had always done everything clearly, precisely, without performance. She described the morning her father had called her into his study. She described the debt documentation Driscoll had presented. She described the years of managing her father's accounts and why the numbers hadn't added up. She described Cole's arrival, the records request, the Denver trip, the survey map. When Cartwright cross-examined her, he tried 3 times to get her to acknowledge that her relationship with Cole Rigdon had influenced her interpretation of the evidence. 3 times she answered the same way. The evidence is what it is. I didn't interpret the 1859 survey map. I read it. You are welcome to read it too. After the 3rd time, Cartwright moved on. Briggs testified after Eleanor. He was visibly nervous, his hands were not steady, and he knew Driscoll was watching him, but his testimony was precise and complete. He confirmed the payment records. He confirmed the timeline. He confirmed the mortgage situation, which produced an audible reaction from the gallery that the judge let settle before continuing. When Cartwright asked Briggs why he had come forward, given the personal financial risk, Briggs was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Because it was the right thing to do, and because someone made it possible for me to do it without losing my house. He didn't look at Cole when he said it, but Eleanor did. Cole was looking at the front of the courtroom. His face was still, but his jaw had moved slightly, the way it moved when something had hit him in a place he didn't generally allow things to hit. Judge Harding recessed for 1 hour at midday. Eleanor Cole. Avery. Her father and Anna sat together in the hallway outside the courtroom. Nobody talked much. Her father had his hands folded on his knees and was looking at the floor with the expression of a man making peace with uncertainty, which Eleanor recognized as his version of prayer. Anna had taken Eleanor's hand and was holding it with the firm grip of a 17-year-old, who understood that this was one of those moments and was not going to let go. Cole sat beside Eleanor, close enough that his arm was against hers. Not speaking, just there. Whatever happens, her father said to no one in particular, I want it on record that I am proud of my daughter, what she has done, how she has done it. He looked up, found Eleanor's face. I want that on the record. Eleanor looked at him, her throat tightened. It's on the record, Papa, she said. He nodded and went back to looking at the floor, and Anna squeezed Eleanor's hand harder, and Cole's arm stayed exactly where it was. Avery returned from a brief conversation with the Attorney General's representatives with a look on his face that Eleanor had learned to read as carefully neutral. The Attorney General's office has formally charged Driscoll on 6 counts of territorial fraud, he said, sitting down, independent of today's ruling. Those charges proceed regardless of what Harding decides. 6 counts, Cole said. The Whitfields are 2 of them, Avery said. He looked at Cole directly. The documentation you provided from the North Range records supported two independent cases. The Attorney General's office said to tell you the investigator said to tell you specifically that it made the difference. Cole was very still. He nodded once, looked at the floor. Eleanor watched him and understood what she was watching: a man who had carried something for 3 years, not because he had failed to do anything, but because the only thing available to do had felt insufficient. Now something had shifted. Not fixed, not undone, but shifted. She put her hand on his arm. He put his hand over hers. They sat like that in the hallway until the recess ended. Judge Harding took 11 minutes to deliver his ruling. He was thorough and precise, and entirely without theatrics, which Eleanor appreciated. He addressed each of Cartwright's arguments, in order acknowledged where they had legal merit, and explained in specific terms why the counter-evidence rendered each one insufficient. The boundary claim he dismissed with 2 sentences and a direct reference to the 1859 survey map. The debt documentation he addressed with 5 and cited Briggs's testimony as credible, specific, and uncontradicted by any documentary evidence of equal standing. The personal attack he addressed last. The court finds, Harding said, that the credibility of the evidence submitted by Miss Eleanor Marsh and Mr. Cole Rigdon is not materially affected by any personal association between them, and that the suggestion to the contrary represents an improper attempt to deflect from the substantive documentary record. He looked briefly toward the defense table. The court does not find this line of argument persuasive. Cartwright sat with his expression entirely composed. Driscoll's expression was not composed. In the matter of the Marsh property boundary, Harding continued, the court finds in favor of the plaintiffs. The northeast corner of the Marsh property is confirmed at the Granite Outcrop Formation Creek Bend East reference, as documented in the original 1859 survey. He set the paper down. In the matter of the manufactured debt documentation, the court finds the original debt to have been settled in full as of March 1878, and finds the subsequent documentation presented by the defendant to be fraudulent. Judgment in favor of the plaintiff. Costs awarded accordingly. He paused. Given the scope of the fraudulent activity documented in this proceeding, the court is referring the full record to the Territorial Attorney General's office for review of potential criminal charges, in addition to those already filed. He looked at Driscoll directly. Mr. Driscoll, I would advise you to retain competent legal counsel for what comes next. He closed his folder. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. For a moment, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Then the gallery started talking all at once, and Avery was on his feet saying something to Eleanor that she couldn't fully hear because there was a sound in her ears that she recognized distantly as the sound of a thing she had been holding for 5 months, finally releasing. Her father made a sound beside her. Anna threw her arms around Eleanor from the left. Cole was on her right. He didn't throw his arms around her. He put one hand on her shoulder and left it there steady and warm and entirely certain. And that was exactly right, because Cole Rigdon understood what steadiness meant, and he gave her the kind that she needed. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her. That full present look that had never once wavered from the first day in the land office doorway. It's done, she said. It's done, he said. She laughed. Not because anything was particularly funny, but because the laugh came up from somewhere that had been compressed for a very long time and needed to get out. And Cole watched her laugh with the expression of a man watching something precious that he had almost not allowed himself to believe in. They walked home in a group, all 5 of them, with Avery joining for the first 2 blocks, before turning off toward his office, and the town watched them pass, and Eleanor held her chin at the correct angle and felt for the first time in her life that the correctness of it was not armor, but simply how she stood when she was whole. Several people nodded. A few said congratulations. One woman she barely knew pressed her hand and said simply, "Good," and moved on. Harlan Driscoll's trial before the Territorial Court took place 4 months later. He was convicted on 4 of the 6 counts. He was ordered to pay restitution to the Whitfield family and 2 other families documented in the Attorney General's case. He did not return to Ridgeline. None of that happened yet on the day of the civil ruling. On that day, there was only the walk home and the kitchen where her father sat down heavily in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. And Anna made coffee with the intense focus of someone who needed her hands occupied. And Thomas came home from the Ennis farm and was told the news and whooped loud enough that the younger children came running downstairs to find out what had happened. Cole stayed. He stayed for supper, which Anna made with an energy that suggested she had been planning something celebratory for several days, and the kitchen was full of noise and children, and her father's voice getting lighter with every passing hour. And Eleanor moved through all of it with the particular warmth of someone returning to a temperature they'd forgotten was possible. After supper, when the children had gone up and her father had fallen asleep in his chair and Anna had gone out to return something to the Ennis family, with the transparent excuse of someone giving 2 people privacy, Eleanor and Cole sat at the kitchen table with the last of the coffee. "What happens now?" she said. He looked at her. "For the ranch, for you, for all of it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "The ranch needs another season of work before it's fully producing. The upper pasture is good now. I want to bring in a small cattle herd next spring." He paused. "I've been thinking about the Marsh eastern fields. Whether there's a way to manage the grazing rotations across both properties, yours and mine, that would benefit both." "A joint operation," Eleanor said. "A practical arrangement," Cole said, carefully. "Between neighbors." She looked at him. "Cole, between people who are—" He stopped, reconsidered. "Between a man and a woman who are trying to work out what to call something that already exists." "Yes," Eleanor said. "That." He looked at his coffee cup, then at her. "I am not a fast-moving man." "I know," she said. "I don't need fast. I want to do this right," he said. "Whatever this is, I want to be certain. Not because I'm uncertain about you, I'm not uncertain about you. But because the last time I loved someone, I was 30 years old, and I thought love was straightforward, and I learned that it isn't, and I don't want to." He stopped. "I don't want to be careless with something that matters." Eleanor looked at him across the kitchen table in the lamplight. She thought about the blue thread she had picked up by mistake at the general store. About the white thread she had bought instead. About standing at the counter with her hand flat on the wood and her eyes not quite burning, and the sound of the bell above the door. She thought about what it meant to be 27 years old and understand that you had been practical for so long that you had forgotten to want things. Until a man asked you a single question, "Is it what you want?" And the question had hit her like cold water, because no one had ever asked it before. "Cole," she said, "I have been careful my whole life. I have been precise and organized, and I have never once done a thing without thinking through the consequences." She held his gaze. "I am not asking you to be fast. I am not asking you to be careless. I am asking you to understand that being careful with something is not the same as being afraid of it." He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said, "it's not." "So take your time," she said. "Do it right. I'll be here." He looked at her. Something in his face that she had been watching change all summer, all fall, all the months of fence lines and bank records and courtroom halls. Something that had come almost completely through to the surface, now visible and warm and real. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes," she said, before he said anything else. He blinked. "I haven't asked anything yet." "I know," she said. "But whatever you're going to ask, yes." He looked at her for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close, closer than she had ever seen. "All right," he said. "Then yes." She almost laughed again, stopped herself, reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. They sat like that for a while in the quiet kitchen, while the house settled around them, and the mountains held their place against the night sky, and the north road ran on toward the ridge where a drainage channel had held all August and a broken ranch was being made whole, one season's work at a time. The following spring, Cole brought 12 cattle up from the valley and put them in the Hatcher upper pasture, which was green and solid and did not flood. Eleanor rode up to check the fence line with him on the first Saturday of May, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to, which was a distinction she had started paying very close attention to. They rode along the north boundary, and she checked the corner stakes the way her father had taught her, and everyone was exactly where it was supposed to be, solid and certain in the spring ground. At the northeast corner, the granite outcrop the creek bend east referenced 60 yards, she stopped her horse. Cole stopped beside her. She looked at the stake, at the outcrop, at the ground that had been the center of a fraud and a court case and a 5-month fight, and was now just ground, good ground correctly described belonging to the people it was supposed to belong to. "My father walked this line with me when I was 6 years old," she said. "He made me memorize every corner. He said a woman who knows her own land knows where she stands." Cole looked at her. "He was right," she said. "He just didn't know how right." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you know where you stand?" She looked at the stake in the ground, at the creek beyond it, at the mountains above them unchanged, and certain the same mountains she had looked at from the kitchen window on the morning of the wedding that wasn't wanting something she hadn't let herself name. "Yes," she said. She turned and looked at Cole Rigdon, mountain cowboy, careful man, the person who had walked into a room full of people who could have made his life very difficult, and said what needed to be said in the tone of a man reporting weather. "I know exactly where I stand," she said. He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with any particular flourish, just the steady, certain grip of a man who has decided that this is where he stands too, and is not planning to change his position. She held on. The spring morning moved around them, the sound of the cattle in the upper pasture, the wind off the high passes, the creek running clear and strong where a drainage channel had done exactly what it was built to do. And Eleanor Marsh, who had spent 27 years being careful and practical and precise, who had signed her name on a piece of paper with a hand that didn't tremble because she had already cried every tear she owned, who had walked into a land office and given a stranger information she had no reason to give, and started something she hadn't known she was starting. Eleanor Marsh held a mountain cowboy's hand in the May sunlight and felt all the way to the ground that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, not because someone had put her there, because she had found her way there herself. And that made all the difference. That made every single bit of it matter. That was the thing she would tell her children someday when they were old enough to understand it, that the bravest thing a person can do is not fight an enemy, or survive a loss, or endure an unjust thing. The bravest thing a person can do is want something good and reach for it anyway, knowing it might not hold. And then when it holds, to let yourself have it fully, without apology, without reservation, without waiting for someone to take it away.